Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
Mr. Secretary, let me reclaim my time, because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street?
This isn't about immigration paperwork anymore. A student writes an op-ed, and masked agents drag her off the street. When Marco Rubio is pressed on the Constitution, watch how fast he says it's not his job.
Representative Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities that were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you, while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
Secretary, let me reclaim my time, because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed. She wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case. Reclaiming my time, you revoked her student visa because she wrote an op-ed. Would you revoke? I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that
visa. Look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
Actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You who granted that person to enter the United States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
Revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time's expired. That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize ranking.
This exchange isn't just tense, it's revealing. Representative Pramila Jayapal isn't asking a rhetorical question. She's asking whether the United States still recognizes the First Amendment when the speaker is a foreign student. The facts are straightforward. A Turkish graduate student legally studying in the U.S. co-authors an op-ed. No violence, no incitement, no national security threat. Even the State Department's own internal memo reportedly concluded there was no sufficient basis to revoke her visa. A federal judge later ordered her release, noting the sole basis for her detention appeared to be her speech. And yet, her visa was revoked anyway. When Jayapal asks Marco Rubio a simple constitutional question, where does the Secretary of State get the authority to override free speech protections, the answer isn't legal reasoning, it's deflection. Rubio doesn't argue that her speech was dangerous. He argues she had no right to be here in the first place. That distinction matters, because once the government claims it can punish speech simply by labeling presence as a privilege, the First Amendment becomes conditional, not on behavior, but on status. Jayapal presses further. Why were masked, armed, unidentified agents used? Why deny access to counsel? Why treat a graduate student like a cartel suspect? Rubio's response is telling. That's not my job. But here's the problem. When you revoke the visa, knowing what comes next, responsibility doesn't magically disappear. The machinery of enforcement doesn't operate in silos. Policy choices trigger real-world consequences. Even more striking is Rubio's repeated claim that the Immigration and Nationality Act gives him the authority to decide which speech is acceptable. That's not just controversial, it directly collides with settled Supreme Court precedent affirming that due process protections apply to non-citizens on U.S. soil. Jayapal makes the core point crystal clear. This isn't about defending the student, it's about defending the Constitution. Because if writing an op-ed can lead to detention, secrecy, and masked arrests, then the chilling effect isn't theoretical, it's already here. This moment forces Americans to confront a hard question. Are constitutional rights principles we uphold, or privileges the government revokes when it's inconvenient? If the government can revoke a visa over an opinion piece, where does that power stop, and who decides? Share your thoughts below and like, subscribe, and share so more Americans can see what just happened.